By now you would have all likely have seen this. And you see, whilst every other theorist under the sun was taking this as a sign of the books were canon or not canon, they missed its true hidden purpose and meaning all along. And that, my friends, is what we're going to uncover in today's video, as this reveal will change FNAF history forever, and I really do mean that. So hello everyone, I'm Twisted Animatronic, and this is going to be a crazy ride. And first of all, I'd like to expose exactly what was found in TigerRock's head, or to be more specific, inside the entirety of the TigerRock plush, and why it even matters so much. You see, if you clip inside of the TigerRock plush in VR, you can actually see what's inside of it, and on closer inspection, this to me looks exactly like flesh, obviously telling us someone had stuffed flesh inside of this plush. And then it all started to fall into place from there. Now, if you're not aware, Tiger Plush was a plushie given to the creator of the MIMICS son by the creator himself, a guy called Edwin. Eventually, that plush actually goes to the Mimic. Later on, they make a TigerRock mascot suit based on that plush, and the Mimic is inside of it. But I'll get onto that later. You see, this TigerRock plush and the flesh inside of it completely changes FNAF history as we know it. You see, we all thought that the only bodies that were stuffed inside of our animatronics were after 1983, right? That's when William Afton came on the scene. That's when he started stuffing his victims inside of animatronics. But this doesn't seem to be the case, and the first bit of evidence comes from FNAF 4 and the FNAF 4 minigames. Now, we know in the minigames it's 1983, and this is pre anyone being murdered. I mean, the crying child, bite victim, wherever you want to call them, is still alive at this stage. William Afton hasn't killed anyone, presumably. But here's the interesting thing. We come across a person in this minigame which says this bit of dialogue, that there was basically rumors of people being stuffed inside animatronic suits and people going missing. Now, that's extremely interesting because at this point in the FNAF timeline, no one would have been stuffed in any animatronics. I mean, William hadn't started his killings yet, but according to this, someone had done stuffings inside of animatronics, mascots even, prior to 1983. Now, we know the next game is going to be featured in 1979. It literally tells us this in the trailer, meaning this will be the earliest game in FNAF history, and it's called Secret of the Mimic. That title in itself is telling me one thing. The Mimic has a secret, and it wasn't going to tell anyone, or it wasn't allowed to tell anyone. And the more I looked at this, the more things started falling into place. You see, when that Secret Help Wanted 2 update came out with the TigerRock plush, the puzzle showing us Edwin Murray's house wasn't the factory. That is literally his house. Because when you put the puzzle pieces together, it literally shows us this mural, it shows us his house, and then in the background, you see the factory. And believe it or not, in the book, The Mimic, it actually tells us that Edwin bought an old Queen Anne mansion, exactly like the one we see there, thus confirming that is Edwin's house and the factory is behind it. Now, if you're unaware, Edwin was the creator of The Mimic, and he built The Mimic to keep his son company, because Edwin, very much like William Afton, didn't really have time for his son. He was always busy with work, and believe it or not, he worked for Fazbear Entertainment. His job was to build animatronics to fit inside of their new mascot costumes. Now, we actually see this in the Secret of the Mimic demo. We see the factory, we see some Mimic costumes, and on the wall, we actually see a Freddy's Family Diner poster saying coming soon. That's because Edwin was building the animatronics to put inside of these mascots in his factory behind his house. Now, believe me, all this backstory is very important because it relates to the Mimic, how it came to be in the Pizzaplex, what the TigerRock plush means, and how the first stuffing or murder wasn't in 1983 or done by William Afton. You see, Edwin and David moved into the factory. The old Queen Anne mansion they once lived in was turned into a gift shop slash shop for all his old creations, which eventually went bust. You know, the robotic vacuum cleaner and the cleaning appliances we see in Ultimate Custom Night. All of them, believe it or not, actually came from Edwin. There's further evidence to this in Secret of the Mimic demo, where you go into a manager's office, see an old robotic vacuum, and there's a huge sign in Midnight Motorist promoting robot vacuums from a company called MCM. Now, MCM is presumably the original company of Edwin Murray, specifically that it may stand for Murray Co-Manufacturing. However, like I said, it went bust and he was bought out by Fazbear Entertainment and was working for them. And this is where things get interesting, because as Edwin and David continued to live in the factory, David needed more time from Edwin. Edwin couldn't give it to him because he was constantly working to keep and make ends meet. So he decided to create a wooden white tiger bed, which mimicked David's favorite toy, a plush tiger named Tiger. Where have we seen this before? Help Wanted 2, right? As Edwin has less and less time for David, and he realizes David is growing up really fast, he realizes that's going to be an issue, because obviously Edwin doesn't have the time to devote to David. So he decides to create a robot, and that robot will mimic what it observes. So because of that, Edwin decides to call it Mimic, after the name of its programming, Mimic 1. And once turned on, it starts to mimic David's actions. And this is where things get extremely interesting and a little dark. You see, in the book, The Mimic, it tells us that David starts to bond more with the Mimic, and the Mimic literally becomes more like David. I mean, Edwin and David literally buy Mimic his own TigerRock plush, which he literally even mimicked the way David had held his plush. However, over the days that followed, the Mimic and David started to make odd drawings surrounded by strange markings. Now, it's worth remembering that because that will crop up later on in this video and is quite important. And another point to note here, Edwin gets really mad because he catches the Mimic playing in costumes that Fazbear Entertainment had sent them into the factory. Exactly like the costume we see the Mimic in at the end of Ruin and the Help Wanted 2's model of it. Now, as time passes, tragically David will pass away. As he runs out into the road to follow and catch his ball, he's hit by a white van. But here's the thing, I don't believe David was hit by a white van. I believe that was simply a cover story. You see, throughout the books and through the game, we know that the Mimic is literally mimicking behaviors. We know it's mimicking Gregory at some point. We know it's mimicking going inside of costumes or stuffing things into costumes, like we'd see in the factory, because Edwin's job was literally to make the endoskeletons and stuff them inside these mascot suits, which Fazbear Entertainment was showing them. This is shown to us throughout the demo we saw at PAX of Secret of the Mimic. And the Mimic's program is literally that, to mimic doing what it sees. What if it saw somebody stuffing an endoskeleton inside of one of these suits and it does exactly the same thing? I mean, it's programmed to copy, right? I mean, it's very plausible that the Mimic could have seen Edwin with David at some point in the factory and Edwin stuffing these animatronics endoskeletons into the suits. It would then only be logical for the Mimic to copy. And who would it have to copy this motion on? The one he's with all the time? David. And it just so happens to be that he was stuffed inside of a white tiger mascot suit. One which Edwin was making to deliver to Fazbear. Exactly like the one we see in Security Breach later on. This is the secret it's been keeping all along. This is the secret of the Mimic, that it literally stuffed David inside of a suit and this was hidden away. And I'll explain how it was hidden and a massive cover-up as the video continues. You see, that plush in Help Wanted 2 has the flesh inside of it, indicating something was stuffed in this white TigerRock plush. Now, again, in the book The Storyteller, Edwin is now working for Fazbear Entertainment way in the future. He's 63 years old, and he's working for Fazbear Entertainment at the Pizzaplex. And he learns that Fazbear Entertainment are using a specific animatronic to tell stories at the Pizzaplex, and sneaks his way inside to watch the construction. Edwin sneaks his way through the loading dock and hides in Monty Gator Golf, and the sight of what's being carried into the tree gives Edwin flashbacks to David's death, and he starts to have a panic attack. What could he have seen which was going into this construction site then? Edwin at some point enters this storyteller tree and sees the storyteller in its full glory for the first time. And it's a large white metal tiger head with one eye painted a deep emerald green and the other a brilliant blue. It gives Edwin another panic attack and he calms himself. Now, why would Edwin be having a panic attack at the sight of a white tiger? That's because it reminds him of the time he found his son stuffed inside of this white animatronic mascot suit, which was stuffed by the Mimic. All the memories are coming flooding back to him, hence why he's having a panic attack. Reminds him of his son's death. I mean, a normal plush wouldn't remind him of his death, it just reminds him of his son, not his son's death. And the really interesting thing here, that tree was running the Mimic 01 program. And here's the really interesting bit. Edwin decides that he's going to cover each part of that tree with odd drawings and strange symbols with the words, "I'm sorry." Exactly like the drawings and the symbols David and the Mimic were making at the start of this video. And here's the strange thing, why would he be saying sorry to a Mimic 01 program? Surely he'd be very angry at the Mimic 01, right? And this is where things start to go a whole lot of crazy. You see, we know the Mimic was programmed to mimic David, and presumably by the end of David's life, the Mimic would have literally taken on his entire personality. Edwin, after literally losing his son to being stuffed inside of this TigerRock costume, distraught, only has one thing left, the Mimic, who's now acting exactly like his son. But instead of destroying it and dismantle it completely, he decides to keep the Mimic around in place of his old dead son. The Mimic has now become David. He decides to keep it a secret, locked up in the old Queen Anne mansion he had, unable to leave and locked down to keep only that personality with the MXEX, hence why that was built in the 1980s to contain the Mimic there, so no one would ever find out his darkest secret that he actually killed his son. This then makes sense why we see the MXEX being taken from the old Queen Anne mansion in the Help Wanted 2 update and from the factory, because the Mimic had been taken from there by Fazbear Entertainment when everything was repossessed. You see, after David's death, Edwin couldn't function no more, couldn't work, and couldn't complete his contractual agreement with Fazbear Entertainment to produce all these mascot animatronic costumes for the opening of Freddy's Family Diner. He was in mourning. He had the Mimic animatronic, which was now mimicking his son to help him cope, and Fazbear Entertainment comes knocking, completely unaware that this Mimic animatronic is an absolute killer. So what they decided to do is take all his assets. This included the Mimic, although they were unaware that the Mimic was literally able to mimic what it's seen in the past, stuffing people into costumes. And this is where the FNAF 4 reference comes into play. You see, it's highly likely that Fazbear Entertainment took the Mimic without the MXEX suppressing system, stopping it from doing certain behaviors, the one it learned to stuff people into suits. They potentially either A, use the Mimic to be a performer itself on stage at some point, or use the Mimic to stuff the suits with the other animatronics. Unknowingly, it would stuff everything in the room, including their workers. And if it was used as a performing animatronic at some point, this would explain the rumors in the FNAF 4 minigames where they said people were stuffed into suits prior. The Mimic could have literally have gone crazy and stuffed guests or tried to stuff guests into suits, thus leading to Fazbear Entertainment to cover all this up and bury the animatronic as far away as possible, literally burying it in one of their old pizzerias, which later becomes the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and then the pizzeria underneath Security Breach. That would explain why the Mimic has been down there that entire time, until Fazbear Entertainment unearth it again in Security Breach. That, to me, was the Mimic's secret. That, to me, is us solving the secret of the Mimic all along. The fact that it stuffed David was literally hidden and kept a secret by his creator, Edwin, due to his guilt and him wanting to keep the Mimic around to make up for his lost son, and how Fazbear Entertainment acquired it, but then later buried it, as well as solving the mystery of the FNAF 4 minigames with them saying people were stuffed prior William Afton's killings. Or, there's one other thing I'd like to put a spin on. What if the Mimic didn't see Edwin stuffing animatronics into suits, but it actually saw William Afton, prior 1980, stuffing somebody into a suit and learnt from that? Now that would be a twist, and something for us to think about. But with that being said, I'm shutting the door on Edwin's factory, and I'm shutting the door on this theory. And with that, what do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. I haven't seen anyone else come up with this theory, and I think it's very plausible. It also fits into my video perfectly from last week. I mean, literally all the lore then from last week is now expanded in this video. And I'd highly recommend watching the last couple of videos to fully paint a picture of the FNAF Lore's universe, from my perspective anyway. A massive thanks to the Fazbear members on screen now, with an extra special mention to William Plays and Lauren C, who are golden twisted ones, and Penguin Lover 12, who's actually a twisted animatronic and an ultimate theorist on the channel. Thanks guys. And with that, I'm Twisted Animatronic.
Stay safe out there, superstars.